the standing orders be suspended, as would prevent the member for Clark from moving the following motion immediately. That the House, 1, notes that A, the government recently extended a contract for the Department of Defence for the storage and management of data with Chinese-owned data centre Global Switch without due process or public tender. B, the extension of this contract threatens Australia's national security. 2, condemns the government for putting cost-saving measures above the safety of Australia's national security. And 3, calls on the government to A, immediately terminate all government contracts with foreign-owned external data storage companies, including Global Switch. B, promptly and securely transfer all externally stored government data to Australian-owned and managed data centres. And C, explain to the House why the Department of Defence has delayed its withdrawal from Global Switch, unlike other government agencies such as ASIC and the ATO, which have already begun transferring their data. Deputy Speaker, we must suspend standing orders and deal with this motion urgently, because we must urgently get Australian data out of the hands of foreign-owned companies. I would remind members, Deputy Speaker, of the facts of this matter. And they are quite simply that the Department of Defence currently stores data with the Global Switch company. Now, Global Switch was an Australian-owned company, but in 2016, Global Switch's ownership changed when the Chinese data tech consortium Elegant Jubilee bought a 49% stake. And since then, Global Switch has become entirely Chinese-owned. Now, 4 years ago, Deputy Speaker, the former Treasurer, now the Prime Minister, gave government agencies a deadline of September 2020 to transfer their data from Global Switch to an Australian-owned data company. But the government has extended despite that, the government has extended the contract between the Department of Defence and Global Switch until 2025. Deputy Speaker, the contract has been re-signed for $53.5 million, which is approximately $300,000 above the original quote. And by the way, Deputy Speaker, the ATO and ASIC also have data stored with Global Switch. However, they have begun transferring their data out with intentions to have it all withdrawn by next year, 2022. Deputy Speaker, there is an urgent need to deal with this motion, because there's an urgent need to get government data out of foreign-owned data centres. This is wrong, Deputy Speaker, on so many levels. It is obviously wrong from a national security point of view. I mean, it is self-evident that we should not have sensitive government data in the possession of foreign-owned data companies, whether that data is stored within Australia or up in a cloud or offshore. I mean, it just beggars belief. If you were to go out, walk down the street and ask 100 people at random, do you think it's okay if sensitive official data is in the possession of a foreign-owned company? I reckon 100 out of 100 Australians would say, of course it shouldn't be in the possession of a foreign-owned company. It's also about exercising and proving our sovereignty. I mean, are we a sovereign nation or what? Are we a sovereign nation with the intent and the commitment and the capacity to look after our sovereignty and our security, starting with storing our data with Australian-owned companies? I mean, in this day and age, Deputy Speaker, data is every bit as important as the land on which we walk and our resources. It is part of our very being and our nation. And it's a missed opportunity, Deputy Speaker, to support Australian companies and to support Australian workers and to ensure that the profits that are enjoyed by these companies goes back to Australian shareholders. It's that simple, Deputy Speaker. Now, Deputy Speaker, this is not about any one country. And in some ways it's unfortunate that Global Switch is a Chinese company, because there's been a lot of talk about China and our bilateral relationship, obviously, in recent times. But this is not about China specifically. It's about the principle of Australian data being stored in the possession of Australian companies and not a foreign-owned company. I mean, we could be having this conversation in much the same terms if Data Switch was owned by the Singaporeans, the Kiwis even. or the British, or the Americans, or the Canadians, or the Germans, or the French. It's the matter of principle, Deputy Speaker, that Data Switch is owned by a company based in another country, and that is the point. And of course, Deputy Speaker, what we're talking about today is a symptom of a broader problem, and that is foreign ownership, involvement and influence in our country. And in some ways, the data switch issue, Deputy Speaker, is a symptom of this bigger problem, whether it be the fact that the Van Diemen's Land Company, Australia's biggest dairy asset, is owned by a Chinese company that made all sorts of commitments to the Foreign Investment Review Board and to the Treasurer and to the Australian community, commitments that have not been delivered. They said they'd be exporting fresh milk to China, not happening. They said they'd be employing about 100 extra Australians, hasn't happened. They said there'd be significant capital improvements, including environmental protections, hasn't happened. Fortunately, I should add that the company that now owns the Van Diemen's Land Company has committed to dispose of some of the properties, but it's still the fact that Australia's largest dairy producing asset, foreign owned. Just like the fact that about a quarter of Tasmania's agricultural land now foreign owned. That is completely out of step with public expectations. The fact that the Port of Darwin is enjoying a 99-year lease to a foreign company. The fact that the mainland East Coast gas distribution network is controlled and owned by a foreign company. Not good enough, Deputy Speaker, and completely and utterly out of step with community expectations, completely and utterly out of step with our security needs and the importance of safeguarding our sovereignty. Deputy Speaker, what the government needs to do is not only get defence data out of Global Switch, it needs to have a fresh look at the whole issue of foreign ownership and involvement in our nation. We need root and branch reform. I mean, I'm not averse to foreign investment. This country was built on foreign investment, and we need foreign investment. I'm not anti-foreign investment. That would be a ludicrous proposition. But we do need to apply a national interest test to foreign ownership or control of our strategic assets. And surely the data centre storing the Australian Department of Defence's data, surely that is a strategic matter. There's so many reforms we could turn our mind to, Deputy Speaker, and I'm very mindful that I'm speaking to the need to suspend standing orders. And the fact that this is such an urgent matter. That's why we need to suspend standing orders now and deal with this motion and start dealing with the broader issue, unacceptable issue of excessive foreign involvement and influence and ownership in this country. And after we've dealt with Global Switch, Deputy Speaker, let's turn our mind to all of the other reviews, all of the other reforms that might apply. For example, the fact that the Foreign Investment Review Board must apply much tougher scrutiny of investment that could adversely affect Australia's agricultural, business and property sectors, including the commercial property sector, as well as our, and this is crucial, Deputy Speaker, as well as our cultural, environmental and heritage well-being. And we've got to lower the threshold for FIRB involvement in the purchase of agricultural land. Currently, the threshold is $15 million. That's an awful big farm in a lot of parts of Australia. Surely the FIRB's threshold for scrutiny of purchase of agricultural land should be more in the order of $2 million. And this idea that all current business investment, foreign business investment acquisitions of an interest of 20% or more, or businesses valued at over $261 million, surely that's too high as well. I don't know what the correct figure is, but to think that the FIRB would only be interested in a business acquisition by a foreign entity when the value is over $261 million is ludicrous. Deputy Speaker, I'll end my comments there, and I'm grateful that the government has allowed me to have my say. I believe I'm speaking for a great many Australians when I say we need to suspend standing orders immediately. We need to deal with this motion immediately. The government, as quickly as it humanly can, has to get our sensitive defence data out of the Global Switch company because it's foreign owned. We've got to start worrying more about our national security, start worrying more about exercising and proving our sovereignty. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.